generally we cook with too much fat. We have the tallow right now. Most of it is being discarded, used as biofuel, or it's actually being sold to the pet food industry. They will fine the server and the restaurant collectively if you ever even offered a plastic straw. A lot of the culinary schools have been hijacked by major food corporations. Even ingredients that come off as being just kind of like raw, fresh, healthy foods, it's always seed oil is like the first or second ingredient. I think people misunderstand meat in general. What's the breed? How is it raised? How is it treated? How is it processed? I think the research is still out on a lot of the microplastics. Some of the other chemicals that you're going to find, yeah, those are definitely issues. When these fires hit, and then everything washed off into the ocean, domoic acid just started skyrocketing. I know I'm shooting myself in the foot here because I'm hurting my own business by saying don't go out to eat. We need to eat a lot more seafood and meat in general.
Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. Hey, if you or someone you love is suffering from chronic disease and you're tired of just managing symptoms with potions, pills, and procedures, I want you to check out Revero.com. Our team of dedicated professionals is committed to tackling the root cause of your issue and finally getting you healthy. Hurry up, though. Our spaces are filling up very quickly. Welcome, everybody. Today we have with us a special guest, Chef Andrew Gruel, who is a bit of a celebrity chef. I guess you're on the day. I see you on Fox News all the time. You're on this gut-filled show. It seems like every other week. It seems like. Is that film? Where is that film, by the way? Is that in New York or is it L.A.? Where do they film that thing?
That's New York City.
Holy cow! You got to fly to New York like all the time. Goodness.
Yeah. I got a routine. I take the red eye out so I can spend the day with the kids, get there around 6 a.m., shoot that afternoon, and then take a 5 o'clock flight out the next day.
So you're obviously a chef and you've been doing it for what got you into doing that out of curiosity?
Well, I went to a small liberal arts college. I was studying philosophy, piano performance, really just up there in the New England art cycle. And I'd always been cooking my whole life. That was my first job as a kid growing up. Loved food, didn't grow up in a food forward family, but obsessed over it. And I ended up spending more time kind of lobstering out on the boats. I was in Maine working in restaurants and realized, hey, you know what? This is a path I might want to look into. So I left college and hit the road, did my culinary apprenticeship, fell in love, and then got sucked into the restaurant industry. Went back to school and got the full degree, culinary arts, food marketing, food service management, business, et cetera, over the years. But that was what happened. That pulled me out, fell in love, and made food my life.
Yeah, it's kind of everyone's life to some degree. I've kind of come late, as my background as an orthopedic surgeon, I never thought I'd get into this nutrition and food thing. And I just have to make fun of our last names because I'm this guy that promotes meat. My last name is Baker and you're a chef.
Yep.
And gruel is not considered necessarily the most, elegant chef food, I suppose. Did you ever get everybody give a hard time about that?
No, I mean, to this day, still, that seems to be like the primary X insult as well. If somebody doesn't like my opinion, they're like, your name is a thin porridge. I've been dealing with it for years. And I think ultimately I'm going to own it. I'm going to open up like Restaurant Gruel or something.
Well, maybe, have you ever served gruel? I mean, just out of curiosity, gruel. I mean, you could, I guess you could maybe make a souped up version of that, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, it's going to happen.
All right. So let me, you've been quite outspoken and thankfully so about quality of food. I mean, a lot of people are complaining. Well, I mean, the Maha movement is like, hey, we've been poisoning ourselves with food for so many years. And I know you've made special efforts to improve the ingredient quality where you're at. Let me just get into this stuff, this seed oil thing, because a lot of people are out there saying, seed oils are bad and they're in every damn restaurant. I mean, that's just a cheap thing. It's replaced everything. Just from a, not regarding the health aspects, but just from a food quality standpoint, what's the difference? I mean, obviously it's cheaper to use canola oil than it is to use lard, but I mean, just from the perspective of taste and quality and performance, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question because that's what I've been leaning into for years, is the flavor difference. We switched away from seed oils in 2017, primarily. Well, there were two reasons, and I'll put the health piece of it aside for a second. But the main reason for me to do so commercially through the restaurants as opposed to just personally was the flavor. I recognize that, especially in restaurants, right? You got fryers rolling for 12, 14, 16 hours a day with soybean oil or canola oil or some kind of combination of those oils. and it's just breaking down at 375 degrees. It's oxidizing, and it leaves all the food with this real kind of acrid, lightly bitter aftertaste that imparts flavor in everything. And then most restaurants also have flat top griddles, right? That's where you're going to cook your burgers, your veggies, omelets, whatever it is. But all restaurants have them, or just in the pans. And that oil that restaurants use sits on those flat tops too. It gets replaced frequently, but then it mixes in with the old oil that's been sitting there. And that's rolling at 400 or 500 degrees. So what I noticed when I said, let's just do an experiment and we'll switch to butters and kind of more of these saturated fats, and use a lot. So there's the price difference. So I said to my team, and also start using a lot less, right? I think we just generally, we cook with too much fat, both commercially and in our own kitchens. So we started using a lot less, and the flavor difference was unbelievable. But then I started having customers come back and they're saying, we can come to your restaurant and eat your fries, eat your fish and chips, eat your fried food, or anything you're even just sauteing. And we just don't have this feeling, this kind of gut heaviness that we get from so many other restaurants. What is it? And then I would explain to them, we kind of change our fats. We use a lot less fats. And then obviously the heritage of many of our other ingredients are high quality. However, it was specifically that switch with the oils. I find that seed oils leave like I said, it coats your mouth, and you can do this experiment yourself and taste it side by side. It coats your mouth so that each bite after you've coated your mouth with this bitter seed oil that's been rolling at 500 degrees, you might not taste this difference as much in like a vinaigrette setting or something in which you're using the oils that haven't been cooked, although they've been highly processed. And then you just can't get that taste out of your mouth. And it's funny because I talk to people now who have completely gone off the seed oil train and moved to beef tallows and fats and duck fat and ghee and all of that. And they say when they go and they eat something with the seed oils, they can instantaneously pick up on it. They taste it. It's bitter. It's overwhelming. And that, for me, from a culinary perspective, was the motivation or the impetus behind making that switch.
So now, what you have? Tell me what your restaurant. You've got restaurant or restaurants. What is the nature of the business?
Yeah.
I think it's a seafood. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. So for years, I started a concept called Slapfish in 2011, and the idea behind Slapfish. Prior to that, just to give you background for that, I had started a nonprofit with the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, fourth largest aquarium in the United States. I'd always been in restaurants after college, right? So my whole life in restaurants. I was working in New York, New Jersey, with the economy tanked in 2008. And there was this opportunity to run this nonprofit. They were looking for a chef with a marketing background and a love of the ocean food systems, sustainability. And that was my niche. I started this nonprofit to try and get people to eat more seafood, but more of the right types of seafood. I was connecting chefs to fishermen, visiting and overseeing aquaculture operations, working with the National Marine Fisheries Service as well to understand really the promotion of U.S. wild seafood, and then ultimately how they define sustainability. This was in 2008, 2009. It was kind of a new concept. So I immersed myself in this world of seafood, and I realized that there was no restaurant concept that was doing that quality of fine dining, but at the cost and convenience of faster food. Now, this was at the time in which kind of Chipotle was exploding and a lot of these better burger joints. So fast casual was taking off. People were trading down from fine dining coming out of the economic crash, 2008, 2009. We were in somewhat of a recession. And I said, I'm just going to go ahead after this program eclipsed and I was done with that program. I said, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and I'm going to do it. I'm going to start a fast casual concept that's the quality of fine dining, but at the cost and convenience of faster food, especially when it comes to seafood. So I connected with all these fishermen and kind of created this real, like a modern seafood shack, if you will. Couldn't raise money for it, so I started it as a food truck, and then I ended up ultimately opening over 40 brick and mortar locations. I sold that in 2022 to my existing partners, larger kind of equity partners, and that was so at that point, I only had I had a pizza concept, a burger concept that I was opening. And we said, my wife and I said, we're not going to open any more restaurants. And then 48 hours later, we ended up signing a lease on our new concept, which is called Calico Fish House. It's a seafood chop house. So we do seafood and meats, and then it's in a full service bar. We have a bar there setting in Huntington Beach, California. So that's really my flagship right now. Sorry, long-winded answer.
So and it's, as you probably are very acutely aware, the restaurant industry is a tough business. I mean, a lot of them go under. It's hard work. I mean, my first job, I worked as a dishwasher. Then I was like a busboy, then a room service waiter. I worked at a Hilton hotel in the restaurant. It's hard work, man. That's hard. But so when you're switching over to from because and sometimes every dollar counts, and so when you're going from canola oil to say tallow, there's a
Yeah.
cost differential. How much? I mean, is it prohibitive for a lot of people to be able to do that? What's the big driving forces keeping more people from doing that, do you think?
Well, it's cost, right? You hit the nail on the head. I can buy a bib, which is really or a jib. Yeah, I call it bib. It's a jug in a box, right? Those are those big 45-pound handles of oil that you pour into your fryer. I can get one of those soybean oil, canola oil, any of the mixes for probably, let's just say $20, 20, $22. If I'm going to use the comparable amount in tallow, I'm paying myself right now about $75 for a 50-pound block of tallow. So you're looking at more than 300% increase in cost, right? 3x on that fat. And then you've also got the oils that you're going to use for sauteing, for grilling, for searing, for marinating, for vinaigrettes, etc. So same increase there. There definitely is a major price increase, although I know there's ways in which we can bring those prices down with economies of scale. But what I've done is I've looked at it from an operational perspective. So I've consulted many other restaurants to be able to make the switch. And I say, look, when you're using rich fats, good fats, fats that are they're still somewhat neutral in flavor. And I say neutral because everyone says, oh, well, I eat beef tallow and it's not neutral in flavor. Well, it's neutral in the after flavor, right? So I mean neutral in almost not leaving a negative flavor in your palate. It's a much cleaner finish. You can use a lot less of it. A little bit goes a long way. So when you make the switch, you have to also make operational changes. Like, for example, one of the things we did, most restaurants will use squeeze bottles full of oil and they'll lace the grill every time they get an order, 5, 6, 7 tablespoons for one item to cook. It's inherent in what cooks do because they think fat is flavor and they also know it's cheap, right? We taught all of our guys to start using a silicone brush and we brush the flat top or we brush our pan. So we do just that incredibly thin layer of fat of fat, because ultimately the fat is nothing more than a vehicle for heat and also to prevent the product from sticking. And it also amplifies some of the Maillard browning. So we were able to cut our usage, let's say 3x or 4x. So now you're looking at a net zero bottom line basis to make the switch. Now that argument works against me sometimes because I'll actually take that to large corporate restaurant groups and they'll say, well, I'll take your operational changes, but I'm still going to use the seed oil. So now I've actually just cut my cost of goods by 1 or 2%.
What about and I would imagine your restaurant. There's a few other like national chains have started to adopt tallow. I think it's one of the hamburger places. It's Steak and Shake or somebody like that.
Yeah.
And there's obviously a supply issue. I mean, do we have enough tallow produced in the country to supply a plurality of restaurants in this at this point, or is that something that's achievable?
We have the tallow right now. Most of it is being discarded, used as biofuel, or it's actually being sold at pennies to the pet food industry. So we actually do have the capacity. A lot of ranchers, butchers, etc., throw it away. So it's always the supply demand. The supply is there, although there's not a means by which right now in this market where there's been an explosion of demand to connect the two. So we just need to establish the avenues of connection in the supply chain to be able to get the tallow that's otherwise being thrown away or being used in other supply chains back into the food service.
What about things like lard? I mean, obviously, and then I've seen like duck fat's going to be pretty rare. I mean, lard is obviously, there's got to be a lot of lard available too, I would imagine.
Oh yeah.
Is that
Yeah, ton of lard. I mean, lard is it's all readily available. And what we've done is that we create a lot of it ourselves. So there's so many ways in restaurants that they throw away fats, and we know that because most restaurant communities, most cities have created programs called FOG, which is fats, oils, and grease, and it's a way in which of course, it's a tax. Restaurants have to pay into this, and they teach you how to get rid of all this excess fat. Well, it's funny. I looked at that about 10 years ago and said, wait, why are we getting rid of all of this product? So, for example, when we're rendering, when we're making our beef stocks, you always have the big fat cap that sits on top. When you're making your bacon, you got tons of bacon fat that's left over. When you're cooking any of your beef scraps, you're going to have a ton that's left over. So we render a lot of our own fats and then just use it ourselves in the restaurant industry too.
So you recently, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you've started a political career. I think you're maybe on the Huntington Beach City Council or something along those lines. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I am. I'm a city council member in the city of Huntington Beach,
Isn't that where Tito
which is,
Ortiz wasn't he on that at one point and he left
yeah.
under kind of crazy circumstances or something, I guess.
Well, Huntington Beach is really ground zero for the fight in California
Mhm.
because we're the area, right? So when you cross LA, the first big city is Huntington Beach, and they call it the Orange Curtain, and it's a conservative. I wouldn't say conservative like far right conservative bastion. It's more libertarian, right? There's kind of like a lot of pragmatism and history in that city and beyond, especially in other cities in Orange County. So we're always fighting against the insanity coming down from Sacramento. Huntington Beach specifically has sued the state on various fronts. In regards to the crazy housing mandates and some other charter city specific cases. Tito Ortiz was part of the council when they flipped it from Democrat to Republican. It was during the pandemic. Somebody said to me the other day, they go, Tito Ortiz, a guy who gets paid, for a living to get punched in the face, was only able to handle Huntington Beach City Council for 5 weeks. How are you going to do? So I'm on the council now. It's definitely an interesting ride, but I love it.
Um, Obviously we went through this COVID pandemic. A lot of restaurants shuttered and probably still haven't reopened. I mean, what is the climate like for a business like that in California right now? Is it recovering? Is it still a tough slog, or what's the future look like?
It's very difficult, and much of it does come down from Sacramento. Even if you can kind of have reasonable city councils, you still get this legislation that comes down that you have to implement and figure out how to offset some of those costs. And many times it's the small businesses that end up eating those costs. So it's very difficult. Obviously, the pandemic, they utilized during the pandemic a lot of the control that the state got through emergency powers and just kind of people handing it over to the state to push through a ton of legislation, things like AB 1228, which was the FAST Act, which is where they mandated the $20 an hour minimum wage, which we were almost there. And I'm not against that. We actually pay well over 20 an hour minimum wage, but you also take, for example, California is a tip state. So, or they don't have a tipped wage in California. So if you're a bartender in California and you're making $20 an hour base, then you're making another $60 to $70 an hour on top of that in tips. They're upwards of $80 to $90 an hour, which people would go, no, I don't believe that. That's kind of average for a tipped in a full service restaurant. So the restaurant pays full payroll taxes up to the $90 an hour. We pay full payroll taxes on the tips as well. So when you go from 16 to 20 overnight, that's $4 extra. And then you pay those payroll taxes on it. But then it's also things like in California, they eliminated plastic gift cards, right? You think that's not a big deal, but for a small business owner, that's a primary way to market around the holidays. People don't go online a lot, especially the generation of kind of 50 and above. They still want that tangible plastic gift card. It's marketing, etc. Other things they're doing in California, like waste disposal, SB 1383, which was actually signed into law in 2016, mandated now the way in which the state and cities get rid of organic waste. So grass clippings, any of your food waste. Now they're mandating that you have to pay to have a whole separate bin in order to get rid of your food waste. And cities haven't figured out how to actually take on a lot of those costs. So it's the businesses that are going to pay a ton more for that waste disposal, which is then going to go into compost, which ironically is not even being composted correctly and ends up getting dumped back into the general refuse. So these are the little things where it's just tax, regulation. And it seems like the restaurant industry is always at the tip of the spear when it comes to a lot of that regulation.
So the move to get rid of the plastic gift cards was just the plastic aspect. They didn't like the plastic straw thing. Was that the concern, or what
Yep,
was it? Okay.
exactly. Yeah, and the plastic straw thing, there's one. And they even went so far as to they will fine the server and the restaurant collectively if you ever even offered a plastic straw. So, and that's just one of like 100. So imagine just constantly trying to track and follow all those new regulations because they have such a large supermajority and they've galvanized so much power in Sacramento. It's like you can't even keep up with the speed at which they actually start implementing these bills. As you know, 731, which was the fees, which was the way in which you list fees on your menu. So you can't actually put an automatic gratuity anymore. You can't put a service charge on there. Now they've amended that for restaurants after there was an outcry, but it's still somewhat nebulous the way in which that's written. And restaurants were freaking out because it's like this bill goes into effect. They're negotiating up until 12 at night, and it goes into effect the next day. We got to print all new menus, which printing costs are outrageous. We've got to change all the menus across the enterprise. It's like all of those little changes, which end up becoming, kind of a mental workout, like a speed workout to just try and keep up with it. And you can't do that every day. I mean, you're the workout king. I watch all your stuff. Like you can't be doing a leg workout every 12 hours.
Yeah, you get tired pretty quick doing that. One thing I've seen, which I really applaud you for, is you include your kids, and you're trying to get these kids in there learning how to cook and feed themselves. And when I grew up, basically I was born in '67, so I grew up in the '70s. I remember we had home ec, which I didn't much care for, but I mean it was offered, and so is that even still part of the school curriculum in California or other places, or has that been pretty much phased out? Do you know any details
Yeah,
on that?
that's been completely phased out. Not and not just the food, right? It's all the vocations. It's auto shop, wood shop, sewing, right? Like any of these kind of mechanical skills. All of those things have been phased out. I was just talking with an organization the other day about developing a nonprofit to try and bring them back to the schools and especially establish high school internships through a lot of these like auto shops and restaurants and hotels. Those hard skills are gone completely, and especially when it comes to food.
Yeah, it seems like, and I, I've got 4 kids. They all know how to cook. I mean, even my youngest can cook a steak. I mean, it's just like, or whatever, hamburgers and things like that. So, but I mean, I saw, a few years ago, I saw this survey saying that, generation or millennials or Generation Z was abandoning cereal. And I thought, well, that's probably a good thing. But the reason wasn't what you think it was. It wasn't because they thought it was unhealthy. It was because they had to wash a bowl and pour milk in a dish. They rather, open a package and shove that in their mouth because it was too much work
Oh my
to eat
God.
cereal. So I mean, you got to think it's like it's kids that don't have basic skills on how to feed themselves. I mean, legitimately they don't. I mean, are you is there any efforts on your part as now a politician? I mean, obviously we're acting on the local level to try to do that. I know you're doing it social media wise. What are your thoughts on how do we get this to the kids so they can have a half a chance of feeding themselves well?
I think that it's got to get done. I'm in the process right now of establishing a nonprofit where we're going to raise money for, especially kids in economic distress and families to be able to put their kids to various camps and after school programs, specifically working with restaurants to try and get kids into like after school programs at restaurants to learn cooking, because in a restaurant, as you know, right, you got the human element, whether it's bussing tables, hosting, then you got the back of the house, just the cleaning, washing dishes, hard work, grit, elbow grease, and then learning the basics of food. That's how I got my start, and I fell in love with it just watching from a distance. I mean, I was obviously a busboy dishwasher in the beginning, but you kind of watch and you're just enamored by it. And even just understanding where food comes from, literally looking at it from the walk-in to then fabrication and preparation on the grill or the flat top through the heating process was eye-opening to me. So we want to establish some of that. So that's where I think you're merging two problems into one solution. So you've got issues hiring people in the restaurant industry or any other kind of vocation, right? Hands, where it's a lot of hands-on work, and then you've got kids who need to learn those skills. So if you can combine the two and ultimately graduate them into part-time jobs, into full-time jobs, and they understand that, just the mere takeaway of basic life skills is going to be massive. So that's my goal surrounding that. But I think local communities. This starts on a local level. All that stuff starts on a local level.
You said as part of your education, you went to culinary school, and then obviously the college classes on the management and the business side of things. In the culinary schools, is there any? I talked to a guy's a pastry chef, and he didn't seem to think there was, at least in that part of it. But is there any sort of emphasis on the healthfulness of the food? I mean, maybe even just the fresh ingredients. I mean, are they just, this is how you make something taste good, and that's all we care about? Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. Hey, if you or someone you love is suffering from chronic disease and you're tired of just managing symptoms with potions, pills, and procedures, I want you to check out Revero.com. Our team of dedicated professionals is committed to tackling the root cause of your issue and finally getting you healthy. Hurry up, though. Our spaces are filling up very quickly.
Well, a lot of the culinary schools have been hijacked by major food corporations in regards to sponsorships and money and donations. And by that, they also then get to serve their products. So much of it becomes, when I went to culinary school, which was kind of on the tail of the Alice Waters farm to table California cuisine era, Thomas Keller, we were focusing on a lot of that farm to table stuff, not through culinary school, but through the kind of the satellite apprenticeships and internships. We learned in school was nothing more than just basic kind of product requisition, packaging, recognition, ordering, and all of that was the commercialized food. Didn't learn much about quality or to understand the difference both from appearance and aesthetics to nutrition of the products. And one of the biggest things that we were taught in school was using more vegetable oils, right? High in omega-6s, cutting out the saturated fats. We did have couple nutrition classes, and they would teach us how to cut out fats from the food and to lean more on the vegetable oils. So that was the takeaway from nutrition from my era, which was like the early 2000s.
What are some of the things, I guess, maybe tricks that maybe the consumer might not prefer if they knew about it behind the scenes that maybe a typical restaurant that might do that maybe you don't do, that it's like, hey, this isn't really a good practice, but it's done to either save money or to, I don't know, juice up the food a little bit in a way?
Just using oils and then using oils in place of fats in a lot of different dishes, ingredients, and sauces, and then emulsifying the oils into the sauces with things like xanthan gum, cornstarch slurries. People just want that richness, right? So they constantly are driving home fat is flavor, fat is flavor. And I always say the right fat is flavor, not fat in general. So for example, like in sauces, a lot of times you'll see they'll make like a lighter sauce base and then they'll add a bunch of vegetable oil to it. And then that would naturally break, but then they'll emulsify it and pull it together with like xanthan gum, which is a microorganism that emulsifies things. And really, really, you can create a lifelong emulsion with xanthan gum. Or cornstarch slurry or roux to pull it all together. And really what you're tasting is just vegetable oil with a little bit of like the beef flavor. So in the old school, you would take a beef stock, you would reduce it all the way down by 80%, and you get this beautiful beef gloss, right? Classic French cooking, European style cooking. Same thing in Italian food, right? With these rustic stews, you're using all the flavors and the beef drippings. We've lost the art in the culinary world to create those flavors that take hours and hours to build and develop and reduce. And instead, now we're throwing powders into the food, and not by we, I don't mean me, the proverbial we, throwing powders into the food, dehydrated, commercialized, processed beef-like flavors, throwing in like a canola oil or a seed oil, and then emulsifying it with a roux or a cornstarch slurry. And it's kind of like tricks your palate.
Yeah, it's interesting with all the various additives, emulsifiers, and thickeners, guar gums and xanthan gums
Yep.
and stuff. I was talking to a guy the other day, and he was talking about feeding his kids, and what he did with his kids, which I thought was quite interesting, says when you're reading the ingredients, you should be able to visualize what the ingredient is when you think about it. And so I can't visualize xanthan gum. I mean, I'm like, I don't know what the hell it looks like. It's like one of those things where you can actually not only read it, and pronounce it, but you can actually visualize what that is and what it means to you. And I thought that was quite a clever sort of concept, particularly for kids, maybe even adults as well. 2017. So this is, you made that switch. That's obviously predates much of the current anti-seed oil craze. It's being either applauded or vilified, depending on which perspective you have. So back then it was more just a flavor thing. It wasn't, or was it a concern about health as well?
Well, it was health specifically. So it was flavor and health. So let me explain that. And I brought up the seafood piece in the aquarium because one of the things that I studied significantly was the underconsumption of seafood in the United States. Our per capita consumption of seafood is around, at the time, it was about 15 pounds per person. Now, look at places like South Korea, Japan, even parts of Europe, but a lot of these countries that are much healthier and don't suffer from the ailments of like the Western diet, their seafood consumption is upwards around 70 to 100 pounds per person, especially in Japan. I mean, I think Korea is like 150, and they eat seed oils, right? But they also don't have that huge discrepancy or that imbalance in the ratio between your sixes and your threes. And I was learning about how well that leads to a lot of this inflammation, right? When that ratio of your omega sixes in your diet is like 20 to 1 to omega threes. And I think I read that back in the early 1900s, it was like 2 to 1. You may know better than I do, but no larger than 3 to 1. But once again, now it's about 20 to 1. So then that's where you get those leading causes of death through a lot of that inflammation and that what we know of as the Western diet: hypertension, diabetes, various autoimmune disorders, obesity, and the like. So I thought to myself, wow, how can I cut out? I know I can eat more seafood, and I do, right? I probably am 75 pounds per person at that stage. But I said, but how can I cut down these omega 6s? And then that's when I started looking into where I was getting the omega 6s in my diet. Things like chicken, right? Like sometimes chicken is higher in those omega 6s. The bad omega 6s, and then seed oils, right? Like that stood out to me. So it was at that point I started looking at packages, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's seed oils in my nuts. There's seed oils in my this, my that. Like even ingredients that come off as being just kind of like raw, fresh, healthy foods, it's always seed oils like the first or second ingredient. And then I kind of had this eureka moment of it's in everything. So then I made the conscious effort to start trying to decrease that and cut it down a little bit.
So, you talk about some different styles like French cooking, Italian cooking, and stuff like that. Do you have a preferred like style that you think is your favorite? If you were like, if I could focus on just this, obviously you've got a seafood and a steak place. What would you say is probably the most, perhaps maybe the healthiest, perhaps?
Oh, well, healthiest, I mean, put that in air quotes. I like, it's so tough, right? And I think that a lot of the styles kind of meld together. The Europeans obviously are going to say that they own American cuisine and heck, even Vietnamese cuisine, right? You look at the influence of the French in Vietnam, and then ultimately the Vietnamese cuisine, the baguette, the banh mi, etc. I always like to say that French cuisine is Italian cuisine because when Catherine Medici was married into the French aristocracy, she was Italian. She brought all of her Italian chefs and cooks over into France and changed French cuisine forever to make it more Italian. But I'm also Italian, so there's a little bit of a little bit of bias there. I like American regional cuisine, right? I love working various styles of American regional cuisine from the Pacific Northwest, which obviously has your more kind of Pacific Rim and Asian influence, to the American South, Floridian cuisine, which is kind of Florida with some of that Caribbean feel, New Jersey, New York, New England. I like taking all those American regional elements and pulling them together into kind of my own spin. Now, are the fundamentals going to have, French or European, have a French or European basis? Certainly. However, I think that American cuisine now can stand on its own over the years.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly a very diverse nation for sure, and we've got such a it's like Europe. We've got 50 states. You go to Europe, and there's I don't know how many countries in the EU, 30 or something like
Yeah.
that. But do you find so you're on Fox News? It seems like once a week or something. I don't know. It seems like you're on there quite a bit. Has that negatively impacted your restaurant business? Other people say, I'm not going to go to support this guy because I'm more democratic or liberal. Is that any sort of blowback on that from that sort of political, sort of politicizing, or being open politically? Has that harmed you in any way?
No, it hasn't harmed me at all. I would say that for every customer I lose by way of a political, a political veto or somebody canceling me and saying I'm not going to your restaurant, I gain two more. For everyone I lose, I gain two, because most of the time, the people who are complaining aren't the people visiting my restaurants anyways. The people who are complaining are, eating Cheez-Its in the basement somewhere, just with 11 different X accounts. And the people who do go out and spend money and support local businesses are those people who are doing so to help the community. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're on the right or the left. You know, many times they just have kind of a North Star that says we want to help and support the community. I try not to be too bombastic with what I'm doing and what I'm saying. I mean, I don't always believe that my message is overtly political, but if it's on a certain platform, you and I both know they're just going to look at it through that lens. So yeah, there's the anti-Fox crowd out there, but they hate, if they don't hate me for that, then they hate me for something else.
What do you, so obviously you spend a lot of your time in restaurants, or a lot of your life has been spent in restaurants, working in restaurants. At home, I mean, do you like cooking at home? I think you film some stuff from your house, if I'm not mistaken, but I mean, are you pretty simple at home, or do you like elaborate meals at home?
I love cooking at home. I mean, that's for me is going home and cooking is relaxing, and especially doing it with the kids and my wife. My wife Lauren, she's also a trained chef. She went to culinary school. She runs the business with me. It's a family business. I mean, and I say that because also the kids are in the restaurant all the time. We have a show, American Gravy, where we cook in our kitchen, and then we also have our cookbook, which we did in conjunction with Brave Books, which is the Gruel family cookbook, and we developed all of that together. So it's 50 recipes, full recipes. I developed the recipes with my wife, and then we actually had the kids cook them to make sure that they were at that aptitude that if we needed to kind of scale them down a little bit so that the families could cook those recipes, we did so. That's fun to me. Cooking is relaxing. Most of the time I'm in the restaurants, honestly, I'm dealing with the fact that, Timmy broke up with Susie and they can't work on Friday. Filtering through all the new California legislation, understanding wage and labor law, doing interviews, talking to guests. So I don't get to cook as much as I'd like to. I always said if I just quit tomorrow, I'll go be a line cook somewhere at like a diner, work 12, 14 hours a day just cooking eggs and omelets. That'd be my dream.
It's hot back there, and it's a lot of work. Yeah, for sure. I know a
Yeah.
lot of people they avoid, the line because it's so damn hot, and they're like, I want to get somewhere else where it's not so crazy. As far as, you know, when you're so busy. I mean, so the city councils, how much of that is that a full time? I can't be a full time thing. What is the position like if you're doing all this other stuff?
I mean, it's not a full-time job, although it can very quickly become a full-time job. I joke, I said the first 50 emails I got when I got on city council was about potholes and tree overhangs. So I'm by proxy really more public works than I am city council. Uh, you know, there's a lot going on in Huntington Beach, and from the residents to all the activities in the city, the ordinances, the planning commissions, the way in which the development is being forced down from Sacramento. They're mandating 13,000 new housing units like tomorrow. I mean, actually, it was yesterday, and the city. We don't even have that in our general plan. There's no physical way to do that. So we've got a lot on our plate. There's 6 other city council members who are we're all aligned and they're brilliant. So they carry a lot of the burden of the work. For me, I would say it's a 30 to 40 hour a week job, but I'm a 90-hour a week guy. It's just kind of my civic duty. I enjoy it, but it's definitely a heavy lift.
What's the term? Is it like a 2-year term, or how long is city council typically?
City council is a 4-year term, although I'm coming up on the end. So I took Tony Strickland, who was the mayor and city council member. He moved to the state senate, so they appointed me into his position. So theoretically, I would run again in 2026, were I to extend my term.
Too early to say what you want to do yet? I don't know if it's I don't know if it's expedient to announce ahead of time or not. Is that something you're thinking about?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm looking at various positions, if you will. At least on a state and a county and a community level. But right now, city council is it, and I'd like to continue kind of contributing in that regard.
All right, let's talk about my favorite stock topic, cooking steak. So,
Yeah.
any preferences, favorites, things, mistakes that people often make? What are because a lot of people in here are going to listen and they eat a bunch of steak. I eat them every day pretty much. What are your thoughts around cooking meats in general, particularly red meat?
I think people misunderstand meat in general, and they relegate themselves to, frankly, what I believe are some of the worst cuts. You've seen me post about this probably. Look, I love a good filet. And I absolutely love ribeye. I think it's a great cut, but there's so many other amazing cuts that are a lot less expensive that produce a much better bite and more flavor when cooked properly. So I've leaned heavily over the years on the flat iron, chuck, obviously all your braised cuts, but then some of your off cuts, right? Your outside skirt, your hanger steak, my gosh, I mean, I could go on flank steak, the kind of the mock tender, top sirloin. I think these are all wonderful cuts that are often kind of pushed aside for more of those center plate cuts. So when I look at eating meat, and people say, I just don't think I can eat ribeye every single day, which frankly I don't find that to be a bad position. It's all about just kind of mixing it up, right? Like getting your meat through, and it's not always doesn't always have to be just dry heat cooking. So braising meats and doing a combo of like a braise and a sear. I always talk about the reverse sear, which I think doesn't just produce a better piece of meat, but it's much easier to cook, especially for the novice cook. You introduced me to I think it was Better Fed, and I ordered from them, and I got like 20 pounds of flat iron. And I ordered just because I saw you post about it. That was hands down the best cut of meat I've eaten, probably one of the best I've eaten in my entire life. It was unbelievable. I could eat that flat iron, the Better Fed, all day, every day. It came frozen, right? Like people also they don't understand that there's nothing wrong with frozen cuts of meat. Like I actually, in many cases, would prefer it frozen. Maybe not the ground beef, but any other cut. And it just cooked like butter. So those things, those offcuts excite me, especially from really good purveyors.
Yeah, they use a breed of cattle called Anya, which I think is a cross between a dairy cow and some other one. I know the guy Max Weiner. He's a New Zealand guy. He's been in the
Okay.
cattle business for like 35 years. Wonderful family. In fact, I'm speaking with one of his sons in Denver next week. But yeah, they do a good job. Well, let me ask this question, because there's a lot of concern for some people about grass finished, grain finished beef. I personally prefer the taste of grain finished beef. I just think it eats better, it tastes better, it's more tender. I don't think the nutritional differences are enough to warrant a big concern either way. But do you have a thought around that?
Yeah, we just did kind of this blind taste test, Lauren and I, side by side, two of the exact same cuts, a New York strip, same size, same weight, same everything, grass finished versus grain. The only difference I find with the grain, and it all depends on what you're looking for and what you're eating it with, and also what you're drinking with it, right? Is sometimes on the grain, like I'll taste the fat profile, it'll linger longer versus the grass raised, grass finished, right? Because there's obviously also a difference in the combo there. It'll be a little bit tinnier. It will be leaner with that finish on the palate. So it'll leave a cleaner finish. And I don't say that as a pejorative, right? Like just cleaner, meaning it doesn't kind of leave some of that fatty beef flavor on your palate. Those are really the primary differences that I pick up on. And once again, I mean, you're eating fatty mashed potatoes with it. It's kind of irrelevant, right? If you're eating it on an arugula salad, yeah, then you're probably going to pick up on it more. You're eating it for lunch, and it doesn't linger, but you're drinking a glass of wine with it. Those flavonoids and the acids are going to wash it away anyway. So it's all on the consumer. I try not to establish like a dogma or an orthodoxy on one particular style and way. I think everybody needs to figure it out on their own. But I have found that both within the grain finished world and the grass finished, it's all a matter of, it's like, what's the breed? How is it raised? How is it treated? How is it processed? Those things to me are more important. I'd have a properly processed and properly raised grain finish versus just kind of a commodity grass finished cut.
Yeah, it is. Many people don't realize, for those who care about that, most of our grass finished beef that's sold in the U.S. is imported, New Zealand, Australia, most often, just because for some reason it's cheaper to bring it from New Zealand than it is to produce it here in the U.S. for some crazy reason. I don't understand that necessarily. And the thing I found, because I eat steaks pretty much every day, and I've had a lot of different varieties, a lot of different ranchers, and what I find with the grain finish is it's more consistent. Grass finish is variable. Some guys know how to finish it really well. It can be delicious. Some guys, it's like, it's a little chewy, a little tough. It's kind of gamey. That's been an issue. All right, let me switch over. So correct me if I'm wrong, like on a chef's hat, that little corrugated hat that people wear.
Yeah.
Supposedly, I'm told that the number of folds represents how many ways you can cook an egg. Have you ever heard that? And if so, how many ways can you cook an egg?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And I want to say there's 50 in the primary chef's toque. And that is what it originally in the Escoffier era of the late 1800s, early 1900s. That's what it represented. There was respect back in those days. Nowadays, it's you're lucky if somebody wears a hat. But in terms of me, I mean, gosh, I could probably cook an egg. Oh my gosh, I could get up to 50. I could definitely get up to 50.
I think you just, I think I saw on the feed somewhere you were doing something about how to cook scrambled eggs a certain way. Some trick to that. Would you want to share that if you can?
Yeah, I mean, it's you get the thing is people use, especially when it comes to eggs, right? The biggest problem with eggs is high heat. People and generally in cooking, like especially when people start cooking, they think of heat as very binary. It's on or it's off, right? It's either blasting or it's off. But you got to understand it's like driving a stick shift car. I mean, you got to go through the various gears, and sometimes you're only driving in first or second gear, especially in traffic. Eggs are traffic. You want to keep them at a low heat so those proteins don't coagulate too hard, because once those proteins start to come together, they're pushing moisture out, right? The moisture kind of surrounds them, the amino acids. It just moisture goes out. That's why you never boil your meat. Well, with eggs, you want to make sure they're nice and gentle so you get that velvety mouthfeel, that rich, buttery mouthfeel that doesn't always come from the butter. It can come just naturally from the egg protein. So by taking your pan, bring it up to heat, and then add cold butter and keep your heat down low and just keep stirring your eggs, pulling it off the heat. It's going to seem like the eggs are soupy, but that's actually what you want. You want those eggs at a low heat. And then you can whisk in a little bit of milk or sour cream if you want, creme fraiche, and pre-salt your eggs. I salt them as I'm whisking them. That also protects them and seasons them from within, and just keep it at a low heat. I mean, that's really the simple trick.
Yeah, that's something I saw. I think it was Jacques Pepin talking about how he was doing. I guess it was fried eggs, and he would basically put real low heat, maybe a little like your cooking fat of preference for eggs. Is it butter, or what do you like to use for eggs?
Yeah, I'll use ghee to start, and I finish it with butter. Because sometimes, even if it accidentally gets too high and those milk solids start to brown with the whole butter, it that can impart like a brown butter nutty flavor, which I like, to the eggs. But if you're a purist, you don't do that. So I start sometimes with the ghee, which is just clarified butter without the milk solids, and I'll just once again I'll do a thin layer, and then I'll finish with a whole bunch of butter at the end.
Yeah, and the ghee has a much higher smoke point, my understanding, because
Yeah.
the solids are out, so you got a little more freedom to go hotter with the ghee in
Yep.
there. Um, so fish obviously is something you have a lot of interest in. Is there any do you guys, is it a seasonal thing where you're at? I mean, is it you try to get, I mean, obviously you're living in Huntington Beach, there's the ocean right next to you. I mean, how do you source your food, and how do you select what's on the menu? Is there like I'm certain maybe a daily special or something like that? How does that work?
Yeah, we change the seafood that we offer every week or so, although we still always have our mainstays. We do utilize a lot of like flash frozen seafood. Actually, I've said this, 95% of all seafood you're going to eat in the United States is frozen by law. All sushi has to be frozen. So, people are like, oh, I only eat the freshest fish. I go to Nobu, and it's like, well, every single piece at Nobu has been frozen. It kills the parasites. And when you flash freeze fish, it actually holds longer and is typically fresher. Because if you think about it, fish, a lot of those fishermen go out for weeks at a time. You're not flash freezing that on the boat. It's just sitting there decomposing. So you want that flash freezing, and they've advanced so much of our flash freezing frozen at sea technology that you can freeze it and thaw it out, and it's like it's frozen in time. So by way of that technology, like we can keep a lot wild Alaskan cod on the menu all year long, regardless of kind of the seasons and the catch the catch quota, if you will. But then things like California halibut comes into season. We'll get the California halibut on the menu, the California white sea bass, various species of California rockfish, which there's a whole litany of California rockfish. Great fish. Calico is a rockfish. The name of the restaurant. Then, we'll look on the East Coast. There is a Maine lobster season. We get all of our lobsters in fresh, but we want to serve them in the shell when they're kind of at that soft shell. So they filled out the shell, and then Nantucket Bay scallops in Florida. We have such a bounty of amazing seafood in the United States. I don't think people realize it, because the top three consumed species of seafood in the world, but really the United States, because we drive a lot of that by imports, is salmon, shrimp, and tuna, and then tilapia, right? But I mean, I didn't even name any of those fish to begin with because there's so many other great ones. Black cod. I mean, wild Pacific albacore tuna. There's just so many. I think we can diversify our plates when it comes to seafood. So we push a lot of those underutilized species, like we do with meats, like I talked about with the cuts.
Do you, you keep hearing about the oceans being polluted and full of plastics and mercury in the fish, and is that turning around? I mean, maybe you have your ear to the ground a little more than most folks. Are we turning those things around to where we're going to have this? This is going to be sustainable for the distant future.
I think the research is still out on a lot of the microplastics. You're seeing a ton of that with inshore fish. So, when you get out to some of the mid-level that are lower on the trophic scale, right? Like pelagic fish that are swimming in water that's been highly diluted by virtue of its depth, which you do get in California because of the Southern California bite. The water goes down, it gets so deep so quickly. Then you don't run into some of the issues with the microplastics. Mercury, I think, is overemphasized. I don't think mercury is an issue so long as you're not eating shark, swordfish, bluefin tuna every single day, every single meal, because the mercury bioaccumulates as those the predatory fish eat down the food chain. So with some of the like smaller to medium sized fish, you're not going to run into the mercury issues, especially the bait fish. And the bait fish are the ones that are really high in the omega-3 fatty acids from your, anchovies, sardines, krill, and some of those different types of fish. The some of the other chemicals that you're going to find, especially in inshore areas, yeah, those are definitely issues. And I think that's why it's really important that we focus on the ocean health versus some of the alarmism that we've seen with terrestrial health. And of course, climate change in general, it's become such a talking point, just generally climate change. But then you can go out in your backyard, look at the water and be like, that specifically needs to be cleaned up. Right? Like you can see it in the water. We're dealing with it right now in Southern California because, for all the billions of dollars that they've lost in the Los Angeles area, we're in a watershed, right? So when these fires hit and then everything washed off into the ocean, domoic acid just started skyrocketing. I mean, we just had 2 dead whales wash up in Huntington Beach, massive whales in Huntington Beach. We've had 6 sea lions, and seals all over the place, in addition to just the general fish population that's dying because of the domoic acid, for something that we could control through proper, and I don't want to say regulation, but just if we actually put the mechanics in place within the Los Angeles region to keep things clean and sustainable. But look, these cities are falling apart and they're allowing them to fall apart. I mean, needles. This is something you heard about in Jersey in the 80s, that and dead bodies through the mafia. But, just keeping the streets clean, because all of that ends up in the ocean. And that's something we can fix.
Yeah, I was in the Galapagos Islands back in November, and I was snorkeling, and I remember just seeing garbage. I was like, this is quite shocking to think that, that
Yeah.
far out into the middle of 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador is garbage floating around, which is, kind of sad to see. So over the next, I guess year and a half, you'll be on city council. Are you limited on what you can bring up, or can you bring up your own initiatives? How does that work?
Yeah, I can bring up they're called H items. So I can bring up any of my own initiatives and push it through city council on multiple meetings, talk through committees and, establish. And that is something that I'm excited about and I've already been developing.
Yeah, I see some, and I guess obviously it's regional. I guess say all politics is local, but I mean, I know I've seen some places where like the city council says, or the city itself says, we're going to only do vegan options, which obviously I would be against. But is that something that's an issue in Huntington Beach? I imagine it's not.
Well, I think that just given the fact that we're kind of like we have a small government focus, we want our roles as city council people to not be dictating what people do, but just keeping communities safe and making sure that Huntington Beach is a vibrant economy. I'm looking at things like how can we utilize our public resources for the good of the community, especially from a food perspective. So how many public spaces do we have? Can we convert many of them to public gardens? And then can we lease out or, just do like membership shares for a lot of that space? Because people in their backyards, they don't always have access to property to be able to have their own garden. So whether it's even chickens and or just vegetables, produce, herbs, etc. With all the public spaces we have, and I think many cities can then cut, copy, and paste that, we can establish these public gardens that aren't just good for us to learn where our food comes from as well as to develop food, but also to just the general kind of community element of that. So that's one thing I'm looking at. As I mentioned, the nonprofits, I'm working through the city to get a lot more of these camp programs and after school programs in place, specifically focusing on things like trade and culinary arts. And then just like generally speaking, with the food in the city, I do that as a private citizen.
And we're just about out of time here. Let me ask you, just as a chef, as someone's concerned about the greater good, any advice on people just thinking about nutrition in general? Like how, is there something you would say that this is what the average person should maybe consider?
I would say cook 2 more meals a week at home. Just the mere switch, even if you're not eating the healthiest food at home, if it's not coming from a restaurant or coming from a package, it's still better than what you would have by eating out. We eat, and I know I'm shooting myself in the foot here because I'm hurting my own business by saying don't go out to eat, but I really do believe that spending more time in the kitchen is ultimately what's going to make us healthier. And then, I do believe that it's really important. We need to eat a lot more seafood and meat in general. That's something that I've pushed. I think that we waste a lot too. So finding different ways, once you do get in the kitchen, then you find different ways to cross utilize products that you already have versus just throwing them away. I mean, as a father of four, I mean, you probably know this too. It's like, where did this bag of garbage come from? The and it really didn't take me just having kids, but also being a thrifty restaurant owner to realize how much we do throw away, even when it comes to just vegetable scraps, right? So making your own stocks and, kind of just leaning into some of that stuff. Now, you don't have to become Ratatouille or, Escoffier. It's just, like I said, 1 or 2 times a week, that change will compound into something much bigger.
Yeah, wonderful advice. Well, Chef Andrew Gruel, where do people go to find out more? Social media, your restaurant, any websites that you might have that people could get some more information from you?
Yeah, you can watch our show at www.americangravy.com. That's got all of our episodes up there. It's also streaming on Brave Plus. So you'll find out kind of all my happenings. I'm on X at Chef Gruel. I'm on Instagram at Andrew Gruel. And then my Substack is also American Gravy, where I do recipes for all my videos.
Awesome. Thanks for doing it. Next time I'm in LA area, I'm going to swing down to Huntington and get some fish or some steak at your place. So awesome. Thanks.
Can't wait to cook for you. That's going to be great.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.